currently helping the city of San Francisco improve public safety. And before that, he founded Cabin, a network city of neighborhoods around the world. He's going to speak to us today about the taxonomy of network societies. Jon, welcome to the stage.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Hello, everyone. Like Lauren shared, I'm Jon Hillis. I'm currently working with the city of San Francisco on public safety, like she mentioned, but previously I was the founder of Cabin, which built the first physical instantiation of a network city. It was a global network of co-living hubs for digital nomads all over the world. And I shut it down earlier this year and have been trying to take a step back and think about the larger ecosystem, and that has led me to the talk today, which is about stamp collecting. Basically science is either physics or stamp collecting, and today we're going to talk about taxonomies, which might sound like a boring topic, but is actually, I think, important for structuring and understanding something as broad and diverse and multifaceted as the network society movement. So first I'm going to do a thing that you should probably never do in a talk, which is put up a slide like this with a ton of words on it. But we're going to walk through and break down this chart over the course of this talk and talk about different types of network societies. And the sort of overall framework for this chart is that the ones at the top are kind of land first. They're places that are first and foremost about building physical infrastructure of cities. And the ones at the bottom are network first. They're sort of first about getting people together on the internet, and then about trying to get those people into the real world. I liked Lauren's question earlier about, do you consider yourself a child of the internet? I certainly do, and I think most of us do. I actually was born the same week as the World Wide Web. And so, I think I've tried to grow up with the World Wide Web. And as a result, I've always been excited about this idea of how could we bring people together online and instantiate in person. And there's a ton of real and proposed examples of how to do this. So this is one way of sort of categorizing, naming, and breaking down all of those different ways. And as you're hearing this talk over the next 10 minutes or so, I want you to be thinking about what about this resonates or makes sense or doesn't make sense, because at the end, I'm gonna ask you if you have your own simple framework for how you might think about this. But just a quick show of hands, just to get a level of familiarity in the room. When you all look at these examples, how many people in this room feel like they've heard of a good chunk of the examples listed up here? Okay, great, cool. So about half the people have a good sense of what we're talking about, and a lot of folks are probably new to this idea, folks coming in from, Startup Week, et cetera. So I'll try to balance and cover both of those. So let's start at the top here. The first category I'm going to talk about is startup cities, and this is the kind of land-first approach. And there's three versions of this, that have sort of gained traction over the last few years. The first one is charter cities, and this is the ultimate level 10 boss of this game, which is basically, can you build a place that has the potential to be a future Dubai or Hong Kong, which has the combination of essentially some form of legal or economic autonomy, as well as the actual physical instantiation of a city that can grow very rapidly. And there are some amazing examples of this, that have happened over the past 50, 70 years. Some of these places, used to be basically empty rice fields and now are these amazing cities. And so there's a new generation of people trying to do these types of projects. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it because right after this, Mark's going to be coming up and doing a real deep dive on this topic. But this is sort of one end of the spectrum of network societies. A still insanely ambitious, but perhaps slightly less ambitious form of this is a master plan city. I listed a couple up here: Tolosa, California Forever, Irvine, The Line. The only one of those that's actually real is Irvine. These things are very hard to build, and you often see these beautiful renderings of these crazy cities of the future, like you see, I think that's Tolosa here in the bottom left. The thing is, these things rarely happen in practice because it's very hard to just like instantiate a full city from scratch. And so that's part of what I'm going to be talking about today is like, what are some more practical approaches here that can actually happen in the real world? Because most of these things tend to not actually happen. And so one, place that you can actually start and get a little more real traction is instead of saying like, hey, we're going to go build this mega city in the desert or whatever, you can start with like a satellite town. And the idea behind a satellite town is, okay, rather than doing the full city from scratch, let's pick an existing city which has, urban economic agglomeration effects, which basically just means people move there for jobs. And let's basically build like a suburb or an exurb or a satellite town that is within the same economic catchment basin, as the existing city, and allows you to do something a little bit smaller scale, more tractable, and more feasible. My personal favorite examples of this, so cul-de-sac Tempe is a real place you can go visit. It's in Tempe, which is just outside of Phoenix, Arizona, and it's this beautiful, walkable village, car-free village that is like a real place that people live in, and I'd highly recommend checking out. Another one in progress right now is this one you see down here in the bottom left corner, which is obviously just a rendering, but is a project called Esmeralda, which is about maybe an hour and a half north of here, near Cloverdale. And this is like a real thing that still insanely ambitious, like relative to just being a like a B2B SaaS startup founder. If you're like, hey, I'm going to go build a village. It's a harder thing, but I want to impart to everybody that this is like a real thing that like you can just do things. You can go try to build one of these right now. And you don't need to have like infinite financial resources or capabilities. You just need like a lot of tenacity to pull this off. Okay, so those three are kind of like the land first approach, right? This sort of, we're gonna build the physical infrastructure first approach. Now I'm going to jump down to the other side of the spectrum here, which is startup societies, which are like the network first approach, the internet first approach. So one version of this, probably the most like well-known, popularized version over the last couple of years, the term comes from Balaji Srinivasan, and it's the network state. And the idea is you get a bunch of people on the internet together, and you build this network, and then you eventually you like convince real countries to give you diplomatic recognition. The examples up here, Praxis, Don't Die, these are all like pretty hypothetical. Those are both real organizations, but I'd say it's like a big jump from like we're an internet community to we have diplomatic recognition. And I would even personally go so far as to say, I don't think diplomatic recognition from existing states is like the most important thing for these types of communities to be successful. There's also other, sort of crypto-based on-chain communities, everything from blockchains like Ethereum and Solana to sort of like sub-segments of those communities built on shared NFTs or tokens or whatever. And obviously there's a lot of like crazy grift and weird stuff that happens in crypto world, but there does seem to be something about the ability to build shared ownership and shared identity within the context of cryptocurrencies that lets people form deeper community bonds online. And then there's this third category of kind of the online first ones, which is diasporas. So this is like Afropolitan and CDAO, which is a Chinese-based diaspora organization. And this is basically saying like, hey, we're all, we have some common ancestry or origin from a place, and now, we have this global diaspora, and we're getting together on the internet, and there's been some traction there as well. But ultimately, my personal perspective is that both of these approaches are not the best approaches. The land first approaches and the land last approaches are not sort of optimal. I think the best thing to focus on is, basically network cities. This is what I worked on building at Cabin and what a bunch of other organizations have been working on as well. They're like a little bit less easy to categorize, but they basically try to have some smaller scale, tighter feedback loop between the land and the community. And so a couple examples of those, I think one that you don't hear as much about, it's not as like flashy, but I think is actually super important and maybe like has had the most impact on actual people's lives of any of these categories of things I'm talking about, are startup neighborhoods. And so these are organizations like Fractal, City Campus, Radish. Cabin, when it shut down, actually spun out a nonprofit called the Neighborhood Village Project, which is helping people build these type of startup neighborhoods, which is basically just to say, hey, get together with the people who actually live around the physical place where you live and start doing things with them. And so whereas the network state movement talks a lot about the idea of diplomatic recognition of territorial sovereignty, what I think is actually more interesting and tangible and immediate is not trying to achieve some sort of de jure sovereignty from a government, but practicing a de facto sovereignty of doing things with people in your local community. And that can start out just looking like literally having a dinner party or getting together with your neighbors for a potluck, but pretty quickly can turn into more interesting things like building co-housing compounds together, or building the public goods infrastructure of your local community. Fractal now has a university that they operate that's entirely decentralized. So this is like a great place to get started. If you literally, all it takes is literally setting up a chat group and going and knocking on some of your neighbors' doors and being like, hey, let's get together and do fun things. A slightly more, ambitious version, perhaps, is the pop-up city. These have seen a lot of traction in the last year or two. And the idea of this, pop-up city or pop-up village is maybe a bit of a conceit. You could just call these like large, long conferences, but they tend to be like month-plus long gatherings of people which have a very high density of interesting humans coming together to do real things in the real world. And some good examples of this are things like Zuzulu, Edge City, Vibe Camp. Of course, the sort of like ultimate example of this in the world that's been around a long time is Black Rock City, the home of Burning Man, which I'd highly recommend checking out. If you haven't, there's a picture of it above. It's about 70,000 people that get together for a couple weeks out in the desert to build things. It's very inspiring. And then the third final category, in this kind of middle zone is, the probably hardest one to wrap your head around or describe, but I think has potentially the highest degree of opportunity, which is a decentralized city. And the idea behind a decentralized city is that it's a network of permanent places to live with a high density of shared culture. So this is like you get together with a group of people and you build a little village, and then you build another one somewhere else in the world and somewhere else in the world, and you start stitching these things together where if you are a nomad, you can travel around between them, and you sort of get the best of both worlds of living in places that are deeply cosmo-local, that care about the place where they are, that have a strong culture, that have some permanence to them, but you still have the ability to move between different places like this all over the world. And this is a very hard thing to do. At Cabin, we were able to build a network of a couple dozen places like this all over the world, but ultimately did not build a sustainable business model that took into account the venture capital that we'd raised. But if you want to take a stab at building something like this, in the world, then I'd love to talk to you about what we learned and what you could do differently. So there it is. That's my taxonomy of the network society ecosystem. Land first, land last, and sort of land in the middle. And there's lots of terms for these things, lots of different words people use. And so I think it's important for us as an ecosystem to start getting a little more specific about when we say different words, like what specifically do we mean, what are we talking about, and what are general frameworks that we can use to describe the spectrum of these things. So with that, I will leave kind of an open question for the audience, which is, how would you classify the network society movement? This is one taxonomy, but it's not the right taxonomy. It's just one that I came up with. So yeah, would love to hear thoughts from other people about what different versions of this might look like. And yeah, with that, I'll invite Lauren up onto the stage.
Thank you so much, Jon. Let's take a seat. All right, we have a few different questions coming in. If other folks have questions, do feel free to submit them. We'll try and get in as many as possible. But to kick us off, should internet cities mirror traditional cities in terms of trade? I.e., should each city have their own moat?
Yeah. So when I started Cabin, it was in 2020. It was the pandemic, and I had just been working at Instacart, the grocery delivery company. I was a product director there, focused on the supply side. How do we, bring millions of Instacart shoppers onto the platform to do gig work? And so the kind of original idea behind Cabin was like, wow, this pandemic happened. Suddenly, people are leaving cities. Starlink wasn't really widely available yet. So for our first property, we actually had to build like a 70-foot internet tower, and like beam in high-speed internet. But the idea was, wow, this same sort of, gig economy that's starting to evolve in cities. What if we had that type of gig economy, but for knowledge work, and then in the same way that cities are job agglomeration markets, if you no longer need to be in a specific place, then okay, great, you can be out in the middle of nowhere and still have the sort of salary and economic density of a city. And so how does that work? And that was sort of the original idea behind Cabin. There's a lot of things that worked and some things that didn't work about that, but ultimately I think what it points to is job agglomeration is still a real thing, and that's why people I think are coming back to places like San Francisco. But now that you can work online, I think you really can like instantiate this type of economic engine anywhere in the world. What you're missing though is you need still like a high density of people working on specific things. So I do agree with the premise that like you want to be physically around other people who have similar goals and desires and things they're working on as you do. And I think we actually are starting to see the first examples of villages popping up. Like a good example of this is Prototown in Texas, which is working on like hardware, deep tech type stuff. And I think those types of things, like little pockets of special industries that are still very like connected online will become much more common.
Thank you very much. Okay. What will you be building next after Cabin?
I'm trying to figure that out right now. Trying to figure out what to do with my life. I want to make sure Cabin was like a 5-year mission that I hoped could be like a 50-year mission, and for various reasons it wasn't, but I'm looking for my next like 5 to 50-year mission. Right now I'm trying out a bunch of things. I am working with the city of San Francisco on public safety, which has given me a very interesting view into how local city governments work, working with an AI robotics lab. And have been consulting some city building projects. But yeah, I think I really want to find like the big thing to sink my teeth into. So if anyone has ideas about what that could be, please come talk to me.
Well, Jon, I know these great guys trying to buid a country on the internet.
Yeah, how about that?
Introduce you.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that.
All right, let's have one last question. How do we make network cities more sustainable or have longevity?
Sustainable or
having more longevity.
Having more longevity, yeah. One of the big problems is no one has really figured this out, because these things like nomads can bring fresh energy in, but they're fickle, they're nomadic, they want to move on to the next thing. Permanent intentional communities tend to be very cloistered and not have a lot of dynamism or sort of cultural evolution over time. And so I think the answer we were trying to get to with Cabin, and what I think is still true, is you have to figure out how to bring those two things together. And I think the right ratio is probably like maybe 70-30, where you want like 70% of the people to be more permanent. And I think the way to do this is to like catch the wave of nomads who are starting to have kids and want to like settle down and have a place where they can live, or a couple of different places where they can live more permanently with their families, while also having maybe 30% of the people be, no more like nomadic people who are coming in and like bringing in fresh energy.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jon.
Thank you.